Whitfield. This long-established surname is of Old English and Anglo-Saxon pre-7th century origins. It is locational from any or all the places called Whitfield in the counties of Derbyshire, Kent, Northamptonshire, and Northumberland, or from the villages called Whitefield in Lancashire, the Isle of Wight, and Gloucestershire. The last mentioned place, recorded as Whitfield in the famous Domesday Book of 1086, derives its first element from the ancient word viken, meaning to bend or curve, and the reference is to a recess in a neighboring hill. The second element is feld, which has opposite meaning to the modern field. It describes open country, or land free from wood. All the other Whitfield or Whitefield places share the same meaning and derivation, which is the white plain, from the Old English wit, meaning white, or in this context, chalky. Amongst the many early recordings are those of William D. Whitefield and the Pipe Rolls of Somerset for the year 1230, and Richard Whitefield and the Pipe Rolls of Gloucestershire, dated 1396. In August 1635, John Whitefield, ages 20 years, embarked from the port of London aboard the ship Globe, bound for Virginia. He was one of the earliest recorded name-bearers to settle in the New England colonies of America. In the midst of the early English settlement of the Americas, there were slave owners with the name of Whitfield, most settling down in the southern parts of the country in states like Tennessee, Kentucky, Alabama, and Mississippi. Our story begins in Tugelo, Mississippi, in 1894, right before the turn of the century, beginning with the birth of Eddie Whitfield, the third son of Edward Whitfield and Mary Costello Whitfield. Eddie was a smart and independent child who grew up to be a fine young man. He answered the call to duty at the onset of World War I during the time of crisis when Germany invaded France. Although Eddie did not go overseas during his time in the service, he did travel extensively throughout the country. After the war was over, Eddie started an apprenticeship at the county stockyard. He also started looking to settle down and start a family of his own. It was in the summer of 1923 that he met his soulmate, Miss Daisy Mamie Nash of Newton, Louisiana, who was 8 years his junior, born on Valentine's Day, February 14, 1903. She was a petite young lady who was a mixture of Blackfoot Native American and African ancestry. They developed a deep fondness for each other and after several months of courting, married the following year. He learned the trade of butchery as a means of income for himself and his new bride. Eddie and several of his friends and family worked at the local slaughterhouse in Tugelo, where there was plenty of work for all who needed it. Eddie was a hard and loyal worker who got along with everyone at the slaughterhouse and in the town of Tugelo. He went out of his way to make sure that his meat cuts were to the specifications of his customers' requests, and rarely had any problems or complaints regarding his work from his co-workers or customers. Except for one incident that would prove a major turning point in Eddie's life and propel him out of his comfort zone and permanently change his life forever. It was in the fall of 1924. Eddie was about to close up shop when a white man who was a new resident and landowner of Tugelo came in and demanded that Eddie cut up a side of beef for him for his dinner party that he was having that evening. Eddie went on to tell the man that the butcher shop was closing. The man then demanded that Eddie proceed with his order anyway. Eddie declined the man again, stating he would have to come back in the morning to get his order filled. The man got outraged and stormed out of the front office and complained to the manager about how his uppity black butcher was mistreating him. The manager then called for Eddie and threatened to fire him if he did not do as the customer said and cut up his meat order. Eddie, being complacent and obedient, proceeded to fill the man's order. This took about an hour to do, and after he was done, he gave the order to the man's driver to place in his truck. The man saw the packaged order and was displeased, then accused Eddie of stealing some of the meat he just cut up. Eddie told the man that he cut the man's order to his specifications and gave the cutaways to the stray dogs hanging around the slaughterhouse. This infuriated the man because he said he wanted to give his cutaways to his own dogs. He then demanded that Eddie pay for the cutaways. Eddie refused. The man then demanded that Eddie be fired for stealing. The manager said he would have to talk to the owner about the policy concerning cutaway strips. The man threatened Eddie profusely and said he would pay for it one way or another. It almost became a physical altercation. Because of the history concerning racial tensions in Mississippi at the time, Eddie did not take the man's threat lightly. He went home to tell his wife Daisy what happened. She advised him to go to his parents' home to hide out if a posse came looking for him. He refused to go without her, so they both packed up some things and headed to his parents' house, located a few miles south in Hinds County. When they reached the elder Whitfield's residence, they discovered that an angry mob had already been there looking for Eddie. They beat up his brother Roscoe because he wouldn't provide any information regarding Eddie's whereabouts. Daddy Whitfield told Eddie to jump a train to East St. Louis, where his sister was staying, and to send for Daisy later. Daddy Whitfield said he had some connections in Arkansas along the way, and they would get word to Eddie's aunt about the situation and to expect him. Daddy Whitfield got into contact with a friend who worked closely with an anti-lynching society that helped young black men avoid lynching by hiding them out from angry white mobs. The league was headed by the no-nonsense activist Ida Wells Barnett. Miss Barnett's organization was known nationwide for its forceful confrontation with the lynching laws across the country. Her pamphlet, entitled The Red Record, was an account of the senseless lynching throughout the South, and the purpose was to expose the horrors of unaccounted murders of hundreds of black men. She was determined to fight for the lives of every young black man wrongfully accused of a crime by a white person. Miss Barnett worked with Frederick Douglass and W.E.B. Du Bois in the past and had gained a multitude of respect and met numerous influential people along the way to help her in her cause of anti-lynching. When word came to her about Eddie's situation, she knew exactly what to do and who to call on. She then contacted several of her comrades to join in her effort to see that Eddie made it safely to Missouri. Time was of the essence, so they gathered resources together and went to work. They formed a chain of contacts and had to act quickly to get Eddie out of Mississippi, through Arkansas, and into Missouri within a few days. They had to find clever places to hide him from town to town before he reached his final destination. They were successful in getting Eddie to East St. Louis, where his cousin met him at the riverfront and took him to his aunt's house nearby. He lay low for several weeks, keeping himself busy by doing odd jobs around his new neighborhood. Eddie then began to seek permanent work so he could send for his precious Daisy back in Tougaloo. After several months, he landed a job as a butcher in St. Louis, Missouri, and sought to buy some property with the money he earned so he could provide a home for he and his wife. He found a 2-story building on Glasgow and decided this would be the perfect spot to raise a family in. He then sent for Daisy, who arrived a few weeks later with a little surprise of her own. When they reunited at their new home on 2505 Glasgow in St. Louis, Missouri, she informed Eddie that he was going to be a father. It turned out that Daisy was a few weeks pregnant just before Eddie fled Tougaloo. They both rejoiced over the news and both swore to each other that if the baby was a girl, they would name her after the woman that made his trip to safety possible. So a few months after that, Daisy gave birth to her firstborn, a baby girl, whom they named Ida Mae Whitfield.